I was probably 4 years ago, 5 years ago. We were down at the beach and I was swimming in the ocean, and it was about time for us to get done swimming, and I was going to be walking back to the shore, and I was from here to the shore where the water ends and you just walk up on the beach on the sand. And I stepped down on something. Now, I've never been shot with a .45 caliber pistol, but if I had ever been shot with a large caliber pistol, point blank, I think this is what it would feel like when I stepped down. Now, I had no idea what it was. Something went through my entire body that immediately made me go pale and almost collapse. And Bethany sees me, my wife sees me from the beach house and yells for me to, come on, it's time to go. Well, I think we're getting dressed to go eat or something. And I just said, and just stammered and said, I can't, something has got me. And I had no idea what it was. None. So I look down and there is a tiny, tiny bleeding spot on my foot that looks kind of like a wasp sting. But it's a little bit more pronounced because it's bleeding a little, but it doesn't look big at all. Not big whatsoever. And so I hobble and drag myself up to the beach house and lay out and I think I'm dying. It's the worst pain I've ever felt in my whole life. My father-in-law looks at it. Now, he's a physician's assistant. He's a PA and had been for 40 years with a VA, the Veterans Hospital there. And he says, we got to put some ice on it. So he immediately goes and gets this ice and puts it on. And when he puts ice on it, it ratchets up the pain by, I don't even know how much. You know when you're in the hospital and they ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad does this hurt? And 10 is supposedly the highest, except you want there to be another. Is there 1,000? Is there? But because 10 doesn't seem to describe. It's not 10 times worse than the number 1. It's like 1,000 times worse. And then so he's sitting there rubbing this ice on it. We immediately call the paramedics because I'm pale as a ghost. I mean, I'm tapping out of consciousness almost. Just can't do anything. Just don't know what's happening. It's hurting so bad. They call the paramedics. And well, they're not real paramedics. They're like beach dwelling volunteers is what they are. You got the volunteer fire department. Okay, seriously, these guys they're not certified in anything. They're the volunteer beach emergency crew that has gotten donations for new equipment that they love to come and try on you. So they call them up and these guys come. It looks like they came right out of the beach. I mean, they got a deep, deep dark tan. They're wearing their flip-flops and they roll up in there, and I'm thinking, number one, these guys are not qualified to deal with what I got going. And they hook me up to the oximeter and oximeter, whatever it is, to make sure I got enough oxygen going through my blood. They look at me and I'm thinking they're going to diagnose me with some very serious something. They look at it and they say, you got stung by a little stingray. It's no problem. And so it's like they see it and they start packing it all up like this. We don't even need to be here. This is nothing. Okay, I'm still in the most immense pain that I've ever been in. But when they see that it's a stingray, they're like, 8 or 10 hours you'll be over it. Just don't put ice on it for sure. That makes it worse. Literally, they said, whatever you do, don't put ice on it. And then, here's what they said. They said, get a pan of boiling water as hot as you can get it. Stick your foot in it as soon as you can, and it will immediately neutralize the neurotoxin that is coming from that stingray sting. Okay, so here's what we would do. We went in, and there again, this is scale of 1 to 10, you're at 100. You boil a pan of water, you take it off of the stove, put it in the middle of, the beach house living room we would, and then I'd wait until my foot could go in it. When your foot went in, it immediately stopped. Immediately. Like, it was like you turned off a switch. as the water would cool off, it would start climbing back to pain. So just every 30 minutes, I'm sitting there getting somebody to boil me a big pan of water so I can put my foot in the hottest water possible, and it neutralizes the neurotoxin until it gets cooler, and then you're back up. Now, I say all that to partially entertain you, but to make this point. 2 points. Number one, if you ever get stung by a stingray, you're not going to die, though you think you will. And do not, whatever you do, put ice on it. Even people, and you know, I trusted Rick Glass. Being in the medical community for 40 years, I felt like he would know what to do. And number two, you ever been stung by a stingray? I hadn't either. And if someone had said, this is what being stung by a stingray feels like, I feel like I would have dismissed it very much like those guys that were on the beach, because here, the guys, the paramedics that came to help me, I said, have you ever been stung by a stingray? They said, no, we ain't never been stung by a stingray. We know what to do. I said, what? They said, shuffle your feet when you're walking in the water. Well, I didn't know to shuffle my feet when I was walking in the water. I would just pick up my feet and put them down just like I'd regular. And, I mean, these guys said they've been on the beach for 30, 40 years, never been stung by a stingray. You know, I knew they'd never been stung by a stingray when they looked at me and dismissed my excruciating pain immediately. I knew they didn't know how I felt, because it literally was the worst possible pain that I've ever felt. Now, went into the emergency room later, because sometimes basically the stinger sometimes will stay in your foot. And the emergency room doctor came in and said, yeah, hey, this happens. I said, you know, I've never felt any pain like that. He said, we had a lady come in here that had broken both of her arms at once, falling out of a tree. And she had been stung by a stingray, and said that stingray sting hurt worse than breaking both your arms at once. And he said, you know, it's a very painful, but it doesn't ultimately hurt you at all, and there's no lasting damage, but it's a painful situation. Now, I say all that to say, it's hard to get a concept of another person's pain unless you've felt it. Now, if you've been stung by a stingray and you're listening to this story, you can come up and be like, Kyle, I know exactly what you're talking about. Man, when I was down there, but if you haven't, you can look at somebody that's in pain. You can see that they are feeling something very deeply, but it's almost like you don't understand it until you've been through it. Now, that's how, as I started studying for this lesson, I realized I don't think I'm the best option for discussing being adopted into the family of God, because I've never felt the isolation, the separation, the loneliness, the emotional whatever that's involved in not having a loving family. See, I was born into a loving family, and I think a lot of us were. When I was growing up, my mom was right behind me with a cool towel that she would put on my neck. And when I was injured or needed help, my dad would be anywhere that I was to pick me up and carry me wherever I needed to go. And the idea of trying to get into the mindset of not having a loving family, as I started reading about that feeling, well, I think the best that I can do is just read to you some of the statements that I heard and read and looked at as I was trying to get a hold of this feeling. And here were some of them. They said, being someone without a family, being someone without, especially without parents, an orphan. They said, when you have a phone, but you don't have anybody to call. When you've achieved something, you have no one to share your success. When you fail, no one's there to give you their shoulder. When you're ill, no one will actually be looking for you. When you feel hungry, nobody's there to feed you. When there's a festival, you have no celebration. When you have dreams, no one's there to give you confidence that you can achieve it. When your parents visit their friends for an entire year, you actually didn't even get a call from anyone. You have no one to trust. Now you know how it feels to be an orphan. You do something great, something exciting, something that you put your heart and determination into, and you look around to say, hey, did anybody see that? And nobody's there to celebrate with you. I've never felt that. I've always had somebody that I could come home to and say, hey, I studied hard for this test, made a good grade, and the person that I'd be talking to, either my siblings or my parents, would say, congratulations, that's awesome. Let me read this one. Painful, empty, meaningless, frightened. You see, people don't realize this while they have a working family. But when you have no one to turn to and share your world with, all purpose from your life vanishes into a puff of smoke. Everything you know about yourself is gone. You're faced with having to find the Spirit within you to make sense of your life, find courage, and give you direction. Worst of all, any mistake you make could mean you ending up in the icy streets, and this is a cold, hard reality you have to face daily as you take action every day without guidance. Through all this cruelty of life, you persist by believing against all odds that you have a purpose, that there is meaning in your existence, and there's someone to watch over you and offer you a compassionate, guiding hand. Your heart aches every time life shows you what you've had to do or will have to miss out on. And a little bit of your soul dies with every rejection. That's what it feels like to be an orphan. I haven't felt it. I can listen to people talk to me about that feeling. But as far as me understanding that in a family situation, I just haven't. This was an interesting one. In 2020, there was a news story on Oklahoma Channel 4. And 9-year-old, his name was Jordan, got on TV, and they were asking him, hey, what's it like? Here's what Jordan told his interviewer, that if he could go anywhere in the world, it would be an adoption party for a home. When asked what 3 wishes he'd like to have granted, Jordan said, family, family, and family. He said, I'd just like to have a family to call mom and dad, or just mom or just dad. I don't really care. I could have some people to talk to anytime I need to. And he said, I hope one of y'all will pick me. You think about that, and you think about the feeling of not having a support system. Sad, painful, empty. You can hear the statements. And as we try to get into that in a sense of this physical life, but then you take it to the next level. And sometimes, especially as you watch Jesus deal with people on this planet, you realize that most of the time they miss the next level. Okay, if you can understand at all the feeling that they're talking about, every one of us knows, even though in the physical, biological sense, many of us have had families that have been encouraging and supportive, in the spiritual sense, there's something we've known. I don't know when it happened to you. Maybe at 11, maybe at 12, maybe at 13. And you came face to face with that decision that you knew was going to ultimately affect your destiny of whether or not you should involve yourself in this particular activity, and you knew at the time it was wrong. And you sinned. And something came on you that up till that point you had never really understood or felt, the guilt of your knowing that you've done wrong. And the separation that you felt from a Creator who put you on this planet as an innocent child, and you had violated the trust of that Creator, and you had literally sold yourself to sin, and you had a new master. But he wasn't your father, and he didn't treat you like a father. Your new master, Satan, was the one who was using you. And that feeling of isolation and that feeling of separation, well, I don't know if you even remember that. I've tried to get that idea in my mind for this lesson. As I have looked at the idea of being adopted back into the family of God. Now, if you've got your Bibles, I want you to take them and open them to Romans chapter 8. And in Romans chapter 8, you're going to look in verse 12 and following, and you're going to see God resonating with all those who have felt separated from a real family. And here's what God says in verse 12, "Therefore, brethren, we are debtors," of chapter 8, Romans, "not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you'll die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you'll live. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are sons of God. For you didn't receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. This Spirit Himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs. Heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with Him, that we also may be glorified with Him." Now I want you to listen to what's being said there. When we were in sin, we didn't have a family. In fact, as the Bible describes it, it says we were without hope and lost in the world. But when we get introduced to Christ and we recognize that He is in the family that we want to be in, when we put to death the sinful fleshly nature and we say we're getting out of that non-family, non-supportive, totally destructive situation and we're coming into the family of God, the text says that you have been given the Spirit of God that calls out for you, Abba, Father. Now, that sounds kind of odd to us because we wouldn't use that term, Abba, A-B-B-A. But if I understand it correctly, that term is the term that a child uses of endearment for a father that they trust and love and feel comforted by and secure in. Now, I'll give you the illustration of what I understand that to be. When Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and He was at His lowest point, the Bible explains that Jesus is going through a situation that He is greatly distressed. It's the worst time in His life on this planet. He knows He's about to be separated from God in a spiritual sense because He's taking on the sins of the world, and He is literally walking through the Garden of Gethsemane, and the text, because of the language, says that He's stumbling as He is going, and He's crying out to God. And do you remember what He's crying out? Abba, Father. I was listening to a preacher discuss this, and they said they had been on a trip to the Holy Land, as I remember this story correctly, and there was a child that was playing in the street there beside them as they were going forward, and they saw this child running, and it was a young child, and he was running across the road, and I don't know if it was gravel or something like that, and he tripped, and he fell, and he busted his knee. And he was bleeding, and he was lying on the ground, and his dad was standing there on the side by his house or right outside of his house, and he, in his tears, looked up at his dad laying there and was just saying, Abba, Abba. What we would almost call Daddy. Come and help me. Come and comfort me. Come and be the figure in which I can find comfort and security and strength. And the preacher was saying the dad, when he was being called over, came over and picked him up and hugged him and took him in to try to take care of his knee injury there. You know, when you think of a situation where you were in trouble, where you needed help, where you wanted to celebrate with somebody, and you think about going home and telling your mom, going home and telling your dad, and your dad being in a situation to help you out of that trouble, or your mom being in a situation to be thrilled with you and celebrate with you, you get the feeling that's being discussed here. You've been adopted, taken off the grimy, sinful streets of a 1850 London city where you were being exploited by a person who collected orphans to beg and to do all kinds of dastardly, horrible things, because that master was a sinful person that just wanted to use you, and you've been put into a family where if you hurt, you look up at your dad and say, "Daddy, can you help me here?" And your father looks down at you and says, "Absolutely." Okay, that's the spirit that you have when you become a child of God. Now, let me take you to another verse. Keep your marker there because we're going to come back to there just a little bit. But go over to 1 John chapter 3. And now I love this statement here in 1 John chapter 3. You look at verse 1, and here's what the text says. Verse 1. Behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called children of God. Therefore, the world doesn't know us because it didn't know Him. Beloved, now we're children of God, and it hasn't been revealed what we shall be, but we know that when He's revealed, we'll be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. Now, this statement, behold what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us. Do you feel what the author is trying to say? You know, you kind of use the word love for all kinds of stuff. I love ice cream. Do you? You love ice cream? Or do you just like it a lot? No, I love it. We'll take the word love and we'll apply it to any number of things in our life. You know, I love to sleep late on a Saturday. I love a good cup of coffee with caramel macchiato delight creamer, so much that when you look at it, it's a real light brown after you dump it into your coffee, and you got to leave enough room to pour it in there. I love that. That's exciting. I love a good cup of coffee creamer. More creamer than coffee, but I love it. I love, you know, we use the word love for all kinds of stuff. I love to play basketball. I love to go hunting. I love to. Okay, what the author is trying to say here is, now listen to me. Behold what kind of love. Now this is next level love here. He's saying this isn't like your cup of coffee. This isn't like, oh, I love my little puppy. He's such a nice little cute dog. I love it. He sleeps on the foot of my bed. Okay, this isn't like what you feel for your dog. This isn't like what you feel for an ice cream cone, or isn't like what you feel about an activity in your life. This is something next level different. Okay, what is it that's next level different when it comes to understanding love? Behold what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called children of God. Who is your dad? Who's your father? When someone asks you, with whom do you identify as the figure that gives you meaning and purpose? You know little kids. Have you ever seen two little boys talk about their daddy? Man, my dad can bench 250 pounds. Is that all? My dad can bench 380. Oh, really? Well, my dad can bench 380 with one hand while he's drinking a Coke in the other. Really? Well, my dad can bench 392 with one hand while he's drinking a Coke and fishing. Well, my dad caught a 62-pound bass. Well, mine was 63. Yeah, well, my dad can run a marathon in 4 hours. Well, my dad can run it in 2. You ever seen a little kid talk about their dad? And, well, they try to make sure that they know that the other person with whom they're discussing this matter of utmost importance, that their dad is better at whatever they got than that person's dad. And the other little 8-year-old is like, no, my dad's better. No, mine is. Who is your father? You know, my dad knows everything in the world. No, I mean everything. My dad can do anything that it takes to do with power. My dad can, with a breath, bring an entire universe into existence. My dad loves me so much that he sent his son to buy me back from sin. That's my dad. That's how he thinks of me. And you now have been adopted into a family where you can say, I don't even know how to describe this kind of love. I mean, I can't even give you a description for the kind of love we're dealing with here. What manner of love the Father has bestowed on us that we get to be called children of God. You know, the story was told of a young man in town who nobody knew who his dad was. In fact, he was pretty well known for being an illegitimate child. At the time, that's what they called him, because his mom kind of ran around in the town and she became pregnant and never revealed who the young man's father was. Nobody ever knew. And at this time, that was very much a stigma several decades ago. And everybody in town just basically behind this young man's back called him, you know, just one of those, but nobody knew where his dad was, who his dad was, and he felt it his whole life. He always felt embarrassed about not knowing who his father was. Said a new preacher came to town, and he was preaching a meeting. And this young man was, you know, every now and then he would sneak in the back of the church. And he would sit on the back and listen, and he was listening to the ideas about being in the family of God and about having God as your father, things like that. And said he would sneak in and he would, you know, get out as soon as possible. But this particular evening, he was listening to the preacher, and he was so captivated by the message, he lots of times would get out before the closing prayer or whatever, but because he got kind of wrapped up in what was being said, he didn't have time to get out. The preacher finished, and he came around and was standing at the back door to shake everybody's hand, and the young man realized he was stuck, and he didn't have time to get out like he normally did. He said everybody started filing out, and that young man now missed his opportunity to get out without being seen, and he came up to the preacher, and the preacher was just a jovial guy, and he was shaking this young man's hand. He said, "Son, whose dad are you?" I mean, he said, "Son, who's your dad?" Thinking that one of the people there at the congregation was his father. And they said the situation got real tense. And everybody was real quiet as this preacher had his hand on this young man's shoulder, and he just asked who his dad was. And the preacher realized, okay, something's different here. And thinking very quickly, he looked at that young man, realizing something was different, and he said, "I know who your dad is. Your dad is the Father, the Creator. Now go and claim your inheritance." And said that changed that young man's life. That's how the story is told. That when he recognized, okay, hold on just a second. In a biological sense, I might never know who my dad is. Might be totally unknown to me, but in a much deeper spiritual sense, I am literally a child of the greatest Father in the conceivable. You can't think of another. And I've been adopted into a family where I have brothers and sisters, and they are literally my real brothers and sisters as much or You going to take that next step? More than my physical, biological family. Now let's see how important God views this. Maybe you'll recall the story. Jesus has gone into the city. It's early, looks like, in his ministry because his family doesn't really realize what he's about at the time. Maybe his first year of ministry. I don't know. It doesn't tell us. And he goes in, and the Bible says that the entire town comes to Jesus, and they surround the house, and it's such a big gathering that people can't even get in. The crowd is so tightly packed in there, you can't even squeeze your way in. And Jesus is preaching, and he's healing people, and things are going great, and his mother and brothers literally think he's a little bit, you know, he grew up a carpenter, and now he's trying to kind of act like he's something more than that. And the Bible, the text says they really think he is crazy. They think that Jesus is kind of crazy. And so they hear that he's in this house and all these people have come to him, and they're thinking, we better go get him. He's at it again. So they go to basically corral Jesus and drag him back home and probably give him the, hey, I know you're kind of into this, but let's keep it down. Everybody's kind of thinking probably that, literally. So they go and they realize the house is so packed they can't even get to him. They can't even squeeze in the crowd. They can't get to him. And so here's what they do. They send a message with whoever's in the outskirt of the audience. And the message is, hey, will you tell Jesus that his mom and brothers are here to get him? And the Jews look like they report that in a way that should have some real meaning. So, of course, you're growing up in the Jewish culture, and one of the 10 commandments is honor your father and mother. And so you get a message that your mom's calling you out. Hey, your mom's here, your brother's here. They're here to pick you up. Think about this. You're at your son is playing some pickup basketball on the local basketball court, and you've arranged to pick him up at 3 or so, and you're his mother or you're his father, and it's 3:30, 4 o'clock, and he's not making any progress to come to your car. You've sent him a text, looks like he's ignoring it or doesn't have his phone, and one of his buddies that you know real well has come out to get a drink, and you see his buddy, and you say, hey, is my son in there? Look, will you tell him that his mom's been sitting out here waiting for him for 35 minutes? Now imagine you send that message back, and the friend goes up to your son and says, hey, your mom's been out there in 35 minutes. She's pretty hot. She's pretty angry about it. You probably need to get out there. And he says, nah, I'm going to play this next game. Just ignores the message. You look at that and you think, whew, I don't know what's going to happen when he does get home, but he's going to be in trouble. You don't just ignore a message from your mom. Okay, they're here to collect Jesus. And when the Jewish leaders say, your mother and your brothers are asking for you, it looks like they say it with a, ooh, your mom's calling you. This is something you need to pay attention to. Now, I think they're shocked when Jesus looks around and he says, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Well, I might just quote it. He says, who is my mother and my brothers? That sounds like a no-brainer. All right, if you're looking around at your family, somebody comes up to you and says, hey, who's your brothers? Who are your sisters? Who's your mother? Who's your dad? Our immediate response is, well, my dad is Stan Butt. My mom's Sheila Butt. I got 2 brothers. 3, really, kind of. We got another one, Stephen and Stan and Cliff. And you just rattle off who are your brothers. So when he says, who is my mother and my brothers? They're thinking, Mary, she's right outside. She's the one that sent the message in. Now, I think they're probably shocked, and their paradigm for family relationships is altered when he said, who's my mother and my brother? Those who do the will of my Father. They are my mother and my sisters and my brothers. Now here's how important Jesus thought that was. He's on the cross. He's got options as to who to entrust his mother's care to. Now, we know he had multiple brothers, I think 6, maybe 7. We know one of them became a very high up leader in the Lord's church. In fact, in Acts chapter 15, you read about James. Well, James, the brother of John, the sons of thunder, the Boanerges, he had died back in chapter 12. Herod killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And then 3 chapters later, you see another James, who is the James who wrote the book of James. It's not the brother of John. It's James, the Lord's brother. And when we say the Lord's brother, the Lord's biological brother. So we know that Jesus had options with whom to entrust his mother. And he's hanging on the cross. She is at the foot of the cross. And he says, "Woman, behold your son." Now I think it's got a double meaning. And here's what I think is going on there. Now, you know, some of the stuff I can quote for you and I know exactly what's going on. Some of the stuff I say, this might be the case. Okay, I know she's at the foot of the cross and I know Jesus says that word for word. Now, here's what I think in my mind. It was so painful for her to look at Jesus hanging on that cross that she was there for support, but his bleeding mass of a body and the injustice of his death was so painful to her that she just couldn't really even look at it. I see her just with a head bowed, crying so much that she couldn't even see through her tears. And it's like he has to kind of get her attention. Woman. Now, that word woman, when we say that, it sounds different. That in English sounds like you're kind of being disrespectful to your mother. That's not it. It's more like almost more of a ma'am, whatever statement you could use, the description for a lady, for someone that you respect as a female figure. That's what Jesus is saying. Now in English it comes across like woman, but that's not what's going on there. You know, he basically says, in a very respectful way, "Behold your son." Now, what I think he's trying to do is get her to look up at him and saying, "Okay, you see me here." But then it looks like he makes eye contact with John, who is at the foot of the cross with Mary. John, the brother of James, one of the 2 that were always with Jesus when he went into the garden, James, John, and Peter. When he went on to Mountain Transfiguration, James, John, and Peter. When he did any number of things, Peter, James, and John. This is John, one of the sons of thunder. You know Jesus has got biological brothers, but he says, "Woman, behold your son. Son, behold your mother." And the Bible says in the book of John, from that point, Mary went to John's house and was taken care of by John. Hold on, that's not her biological son. She's got at least 7 biological sons, 6 at least. And somehow Jesus entrusts the care of his biological mother to one of his disciples when there are 6 other biological sons that could have done the job? Why? Who is my mother and my sisters and my brothers? Those who do the will of my Father in heaven. These are my mother and sisters and brothers. Because Jesus recognized the reality and the profound truth that a spiritual family, not a spiritual family, the singular spiritual family of God is the most robust, comforting, secure, strongest bound together family that's ever been designed. And the whole purpose of any biological family on this planet, the entire purpose of it, is for you to get a concept, the closest you can get to understanding the family of God is a strong Christian biological family. And when you think of the most meaningful aspects of your life, the celebrations you've been through, the people you want to be around you when you die, the people you want to be around you when there is something good going in your life, the people you want to be around you when there's something bad going on in your life, when you think about who you want there, it's always your family, isn't it? And if you could take that to the next level and grasp the concept, behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called children of God.